What's up, everybody? Today I want to talk about lavalier microphones and give you some basic concepts of what to look for in a lav and show you a couple of lavaliers that I think you should be aware of if you're looking to record with them. Now, one of these I'm very familiar with. That's the Voice Technologies VT500WA Adventure Lav. I've used this mic to record both dialogue and sound effects, and I think it's a good baseline of what to expect from a high-quality lavalier mic. The other one I want to talk about is the Shure TL46, which is one that I'm not too familiar with, but I want to compare it to the VT500WA Adventure, see how they stack up, and what sounds the best. Before we get started, if you enjoy these videos, you want to support the channel, head on over to my website, alexknickerbocker.com. I've got a bunch of royalty-free sound effects curated from my personal library for your use in any project. You can also donate to the channel, or most importantly, hit subscribe down below. All these things are really going to help me spend more time making this content available for everybody. All right, let's talk about lavalier mics. When it comes to sound for picture and sound for video, you're probably already familiar with boom mics or shotgun microphones. Those kinds of microphones are really directed at capturing the voice from as best a perspective as possible to get the most natural sound you can on a set. Now, lavalier microphones are directed at still capturing as natural a sound as possible, but they're used primarily as a backup for boom microphones in film and television production situations, as well as good isolated microphones whenever you need clear, crisp, and isolated dialogue from talent when you don't have a microphone visible or you're too far away to actually get a microphone close enough to record. Ergonomics and form factor with lavs is really important to keep them hidden and keep them out of the way whenever they're being used. So let's talk about that first. The VT500WA here is pretty small. It's got more of a boxy form factor, and you can actually see the capsule here is right in front of the microphone, which is actually not the traditional setup for lavs. Usually you see the capsule kind of pointing out the top end, like the TL46 here. Now, the TL46 is a little bit smaller in comparison to the Voice Technologies lav, so that's going to make it a little bit easier to hide right off the bat, but this is a little bit thicker as well, so depending on what kind of costuming you're working with or clothing you might be attaching it to, these are going to be factors in deciding which you might want to use. Another important factor in that are actually the cables that these mics come with. Now, the Voice Technologies lav, I have a lot of experience with these cables. They're really durable, they're flexible, they're easy to actually manipulate and wind around things or hide, but the cables are made in such a way that they don't remember a certain shape, so you're not going to get coiled cables that kind of poke through or try and maintain that wound around sort of shape when you store them, which is a really good thing. You don't want lav cables to get kinks in them or to have any kind of memory, so to speak, when it comes to actually holding their form. The TL46 cable also has a bit of a glossier feel to it, which could help it actually move around through clothes and maybe not get stuck on anything, which is good, but I kind of prefer the feel and the form factor of the VT500WA's cable just because it feels a little bit higher quality to me, and it's a little bit smaller, so it's not going to be as challenging maybe to manipulate. But that being said, the TL46's cable isn't going to hold any form factor either. It's going to have all the same benefits as the 500s. It's just a little bit thicker. It feels maybe a little bit less prone to snapping or tearing if you put stress on the cable itself, but not in such a meaningful way that I'd want to change over to a lav just based on the cable. The other factor here are the terminations of the actual cables, what you're going to be plugging these lavaliers into. 90% of the time, you're going to be plugging them into some kind of wireless transmitter so you can broadcast the lav signal wirelessly to a distant recorder. And that way you have total independence from any kind of movement of camera or any kind of movement of talent. You're not going to have to worry about them going off axis or off mic since the mic's attached to them. As far as accessories go, both of these microphones are compatible with a bunch of different ways to mount the mics to talent, whether it's a simple clip like you'd put on the outside of a suit, or it's some sort of vampire clip, or maybe even a magnetic clip that you can mount inside or around clothing to make things a little bit less visible. One of the things that the TL46 has that the 500WA does not are different capsule heads that actually change the sound of the microphone at the capsule before the mic even picks things up and gets recorded in the first place. Now, these are great for making decisions about how you're picking up sound as you're recording it. Whether you're in a windy environment or maybe you have sweat from talent that's going to be on the microphone if you're recording maybe a theatrical performance or something on Broadway, things like that. Or more specifically, if you have to hide the mic underneath clothing, you're going to lose some of your top end because you've got cloth covering the capsule. So you can actually change out the head on top of the capsule and it can boost up how this mic picks up high frequencies and compensate if you have clothing covering the capsule, give you better high end response. And again, depending on how you're recording and what you're recording, maybe tailor the starting point of this microphone more to your sound source than you would with any other microphone that doesn't have these abilities. Now, before we get into specifications, I want to talk about price. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different kinds of mics on this channel, from entry level all the way up to professional and everything in between. This video, I want to give you a baseline of what professional microphones can sound like against each other. So these are a little bit more at the professional end of the spectrum. The VT500WA comes in at $409, the way that I've got it configured here. The TL46 is a little tiny bit cheaper at $399 right now. That's about what you should expect to pay for a really solid professional level lavalier microphone. Those are your DPA 4060 series, maybe your Sonken COS 11s, anything in that range where it's kind of an industry standard on a film set. It's about $400 per microphone. Now, when it comes to theoretical specifications, you can talk a lot about which mic might be better or worse than the other. It kind of comes down to how it sounds and how it performs in the field. But the three things that I find myself paying attention to the most with pretty much every microphone are frequency response, maximum sound pressure level, and of course, self-noise. Now, the frequency response of both of these mics are pretty solid. The TL46 is 20 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz, which is roughly the range of human hearing, so it's going to pick up and be sensitive to all of those frequencies. The VT500WA is from 40 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Now, honestly, in practice, even though the Shure picks up more frequencies at that bottom end, I don't generally want anything below about 40 or 50 hertz whenever I'm recording voices. The Shure, again, can capture a whole bunch more frequencies down at that lower range, and that's going to make it a little bit better suited for things like car exhausts or gunshots or something along those lines. But in a dialogue recording situation, maybe not so necessary. Maximum sound pressure level is how loud a sound can be before it starts making the mic capsule distort, which is going to color your sound. It's not going to be right or accurate or anything like that. The Shure is 134 dB SPL, which is pretty loud. That's basically standing next to a jet engine at full blast. The VT500WA is a little bit lower at 118 dB SPL. Now, that's still really loud. Somebody could scream at the top of their lungs into this microphone and it could handle it without any issues. So again, not too big of a deal here, but if you're recording something very specifically loud that's way louder than the human voice, maybe the Shure is going to be a little bit better of a choice here. The other thing is self-noise, and that's really important when you're dealing with quiet situations. Like if somebody's whispering or somebody's talking really, really low, you want the microphone to be able to pick that up without contaminating that recording with its own electrical noise. The Shure comes in at 24 dB of self-noise. Now, that's not particularly quiet, but it's also not so loud that it's going to be contaminating any whispers or contaminating any quiet talking. Now, if I was recording ambiances, I'd want something much quieter than that. A Sennheiser 8040, for example, has a noise floor that's closer to 14 dBA, and that's fantastic for capturing really, really subtle ambiances or sound effects that are going to be layered in against the rest of a soundscape. For dialogue, you're generally not going to need that kind of performance out of a lavalier mic, so I'm good with the Shure. The VT500 is a little bit louder at 26 dBA. That's not enough of a difference to make me change microphones just based off of that alone, but it is something to keep in mind if you're recording really, really quiet scenes. And of course, it's important to pay attention to both the polar pattern and the actual frequency response of both microphones. You can see the frequency response charts here. The Shure, you can actually, again, change the frequency response at the microphone with those different capsule heads, and that's going to give you slightly brighter or slightly darker sound. The VT500 is a pretty natural sounding mic across the board with a little bit of a bump in the top end. So again, if you've got these microphones hidden underneath clothes, they're naturally going to pick up a little bit more high frequencies to make up for any muffling that those clothes might have on the microphones. Both are also omnidirectional microphones, which means they're going to pick up sound evenly and equally from any direction that sound might come in. Now that makes for great lavalier mics because people are constantly turning their heads and moving as they're talking. And with a directional mic like the cardioid I've got here, as soon as I move away from the mic, you're going to notice that it's not going to pick up very well. But if I'm right in front of it, it's nice and full and present. A lavalier mic with an Omni capsule is going to be able to pick up any good quality sound no matter where you turn your head, and that's going to be very different from a cardioid capsule or a more directional microphone like a shotgun. So let me actually put these mics on and show you how they compare against each other, but also a large capsule studio microphone. When it comes to lav mic placement, that's a whole dark art. I can make some more videos about that if you're interested, but basically right now, all I want to hear is how these microphones respond in an ideal situation. I've got them both mounted just above my sternum, which is going to give me enough distance between my mouth and the lavs themselves that I'm not going to run into any kind of resonance from my throat or where my voice is actually coming from. If you put them too close to your mouth, you end up getting a lot of weirdness from the actual voice box here, and that kind of makes things sound a lot more, I don't know, weird and resonant and dull. And then you also obscure a lot of the high frequencies from your mouth. And so the lavs aren't picking things up the right way. And they're going to sound really bad. Now, this entire time I've been talking through a Lauten Audio LS-208, which is a large capsule studio style condenser microphone. I like it on my voice. I like it in my room here. I think it does a pretty good job of picking up all the stuff I want it to, making it sound pretty good, and rejecting all the stuff that I don't want in my recordings. By comparison, this is the VT500WA from Voice Technologies. Very different sound from a studio condenser microphone, but again, this is what you're going to get from a little bit more of a high-end lavalier in an indoor space. Now keep in mind again, this is an omnidirectional capsule, so it's picking up everything around it, which means there's going to be a little bit more reverb, a little bit more stuff going on than something like, again, the directionality and the rejection pattern of the LS-208. Now, in addition to pickup pattern and frequency response, you're also going to get pretty big differences in mic placement here. So again, this is what the LS-208 sounds because I'm talking directly into it. It's much more of a present sort of voiceover style microphone, whereas with the VT500WA, it's a little bit more of a natural sound in that you've got a lot more of the space, you've got a lot more kind of going on, and it's picking up the voice from a more conversational perspective for use in, again, sort of an interview style or more of a direct conversational style of delivery. Now compare the sound of the VT500WA with the sound of the Shure TL46. Now, again, this is the same room, same mic placement, basically, with a little bit of a different specification range of frequency response and that kind of thing. One big difference I didn't mention here is I've got some processing on my LS-208 to get the sound that I want out of it. It's a good starting point, but I want to clean it up a little bit. These two lavs have been pretty much raw this entire time. The only sound you're going to be hearing that might color it a little bit is the Sound Devices Mix Pre 10.2 recorder I'm running it into, and those are really notorious for having clean, transparent sound. So this is about as good as you're going to get out of the raw microphones. This is the LS-208 completely unprocessed, so you can get a sense of where this started and where I ended up with the processing. Now compare that to the VT500WA totally raw. It's a bit of a different sound. Now again, compare that to the TL46. That's got a different style as well. It's going to have its differences from the 500 as well as the 208 itself. Now, without changing anything else, I'm going to swap out the head of the TL46 so you can hear this sort of presence boost that you might get just from flipping out the capsule head. This is the difference that just that simple change can make. Again, no change in mic placement, no change in processing. This is all raw straight out of the microphones. Compare one more time to the VT500WA so you can get a sense of what those differences are, and then again to the LS-208 so you know the studio sound, then back to the TL46 so again you can hear all this kind of stuff making a difference at the microphone and a difference in mic placement and microphone type. I'm changing back over to the flat capsule for the TL46 so I can get a natural sound out of it again, because I want to show you the processing that I might use on each of these microphones to get them to end up where I might want them. You've already heard the LS-208's processing and kind of what I think it should be. I've taken out some frequencies that I don't like, I've boosted some of the stuff that I do like, and I'm filtering the top end and the bottom end so I'm not getting anything extraneous. Now, the differences in these microphones and how I process them is going to be pretty significant, but the ideas are all the same here. For the VT500, I'm going to be rolling off the lows and the highs the same way that I would with another microphone, and I'm going to be notching out other frequencies that might resonate with this mic and boosting things similarly to get the same kind of presence and hopefully the same kind of natural response that I might like out of a studio style condenser. I'm going to do the same thing with the TL46, accounting for a few of the differences in how this mic picks sound up. And again, it's not going to sound the same as a directional studio style microphone, but I can clean things up and get them sounding a little bit more broadcast ready or maybe film sound ready than they were at the starting point. So again, here's the processed LS-208 stuff. Here is the VT500WA with its processing, and here is the TL46's processing and where I ended up between the three. Cycling back and forth, again, you're going to develop a preference for which you like and which you might use on a voice like mine versus ones you might avoid in a recording situation. Again, both of these mics are more in the professional price range, so you're not going to get a bad sounding microphone from either of these companies. It's just more, again, about what sound you prefer on the sound sources you're capturing. Now, there's one other detail about the VT500WA. It's kind of in the name, but I didn't touch on it. This microphone is IPX7 rated to be waterproof, which is a huge detail that I think doesn't really go talked about enough when it comes to lavaliers. Most of the time, you're not going to be pouring huge amounts of water on lav mics and potentially destroying them. But if you have any kind of inclement weather, if you need to have somebody in water when you're shooting, or if you want something that's going to be really, really well able to stand up to the elements, that's going to be a determining factor in what gear you choose as well, of course. It's kind of like weather sealing on a camera. It's going to be really, really helpful to have it as soon as you need it, but maybe you don't need it in every situation. So on that note, I hope you enjoyed the video and the comparison between these three mics. Tell me in the comments which you preferred and which you really didn't like, or if you didn't like any of them, let me know as well. I'm over on Instagram at AXK, so come follow me over there. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.